Hey guys, it's Bernie here. This is not a typical Vault video. We figured we'd do something a little different just because it's the end of Dragonflight. And I think I felt like I said I was going to do a tier list for raid bosses like when I did my dungeon one, which was back in season 3 was ending. So it's been a few months. Haven't really done much since then. So I figured I would just do one now before the impending release of The War Within. It drops on Thursday night, 3 p.m., I believe, my time, so 6 Eastern, something like that, for the early access, and then it drops on Monday if you don't have that edition purchased. But let's go ahead and talk about the raid tier list. So, just my perspective. Most of these are going to be from a healing perspective. I played Holy Paladin. In about half of these raid tiers, I cleared all of it on Awakened. We actually didn't get CE the first tier. We also didn't get it on the third tier. We had Farrak down to like 20%, but just couldn't catch it. First tier, we didn't even pull Raz, so I only have Awakened experience on that, and I've cleared everything else on Awakened, so we'll primarily be talking about the mythic bosses from a healer role. If I have to make specific caveats, I will. And again, this is just my opinion. There's no right or wrong. It's just what we feel. So, I have it in chronological order. We'll just go ahead and start with Aranog. We'll explain why I'm ranking them the way that they are. I think for me, Aranog is a good example of a first boss. Has like a little bit of a DPS check with the lava walls coming in, which that was kind of fun. And then there's some ad pad, and the healing kind of it didn't really matter. You just had to dispel. But from a DPS perspective, I think I played Ellie Shaman for this one. Pretty fun. Cooldown synced up well with ads. If you were one of those lucky classes that could sync up with CDs, Aranog was pretty spicy. So we'll go ahead and I kind of want to give this an A. I feel like Blizzard did really well in their first bosses this tier, or this expansion rather. So very happy with Aranog. Considering it's just a first boss, not a lot of mechanics, that was fun. Primal Council. I feel like the Council bosses did not fare as well as the first bosses this expansion. I was not a huge fan of Primal Council. It just wasn't engaging, and I did like that the mechanics like interact with each other. Like the fire you had to use to remove the frost, but the fire shrunk when you stepped in it, so you had to like ration out how much you were stepping in it, basically only once. The lightning is just an annoying mechanic, and melee are too brain dead to like think for themselves, so they just continuously spread it. So I was not a huge fan of this. I guess it was cool if you were a 4 target class, like a marksman hunter. Boomkin was okay. Yeah, how do I put it? I'm gonna say it's a C for me. Just I feel like it didn't do council the way that I like, and it just wasn't engaging enough. Next we have Taros. Taros, I feel like I have to give it an S. As crazy as that may be, I don't know. I don't know if that's popular or not. I thought Taros was a great single target boss. Also with a high healing check, so as a healer it was very fun. Kind of limited bursts of movement. It was a little dance. You had to dance where the pillar spots were, and then you had to move when the swirly showed up, and then when you had to clear the mythic debuff. So you were doing a bit of a dance, and I thought that was enjoyable. Wasn't super tightly tuned. Only if you like had really bad gear was it a challenge, but thought it was a pretty good single target push boss. Especially as a healer, I liked it a lot. There's plenty to heal. Whenever you shattered the pillars, there was a ton to heal, so that was fun. Senarth. I'm gonna be honest, I fucking hated Senarth. Senarth's an instant D for me. The web mechanic, or the pull-in, is just not fun. I don't know what they were thinking, but there was just an amalgamation of mechanics on this fight that I just did not enjoy. The pull-in was garbage. The web mechanic, I guess, was okay. You could bop or immunity out of it if you had one. What you're supposed to do is use the little spiders to break the webbings, but ideally you just wouldn't get webbed in the first place. I think the only people who you got webbed were tanks in the last phase. Um, but the ice going up the stairs was awful. The tornadoes moving on the stairs was fucking awful. Pulls happening while on the stairs is awful. So like if you were a DK, great, or a class with a teleport, fine, because you could ignore it. But if you didn't have those things, it sucked. And would not recommend. Like, yeah, it wasn't that hard, but it wasn't fun either. So, shit boss. Kurog. Ooh. I want to put Kurog in S, but from a mythic perspective, I can't. I just can't do it. I think I'm going to put it in A. And the only thing that's keeping it from S is the gimmick of the ads. So the strat that people used was they would keep him in fire for the first phase until like 90 something energy, and then right as he was about to go into the middle, they would phase him over into I think it's the lightning section, and you would only get one tick of lightning. But the tank had to taunt at a very precise time to move him over before he spawned the lightning ad. So you had like a 1 to 1.5 second window to get him moved over appropriately, or he spawned an ad with a ridiculous amount of health that made the fight not impossible, but way fucking harder. And I think if Blizzard had nailed the mechanic of how the ads had spawned, or tuned down the ads' HP maybe, because the ads had so much HP that people just wanted to skip them. So they had this weird gimmicky strat where you just kept him in fire until like 94, and then you moved him, got one tick of lightning to guarantee the lightning ad in the intermission phase, but you skipped the big lightning ad, which obviously was not intended, and Blizzard never fixed it, so that's what people just did for the entire tier. And in my mind, that is like a failed boss design. But otherwise, really fun. Lots to heal, some interesting mechanics. I wasn't a huge fan of like the heal absorb at certain phases, but like that's part of the challenge of the fight was like planning your health pots or CDs around that so that you wouldn't die. I liked the dance with the ads. It was interesting enough. I just think the ad gimmick, trying to skip a whole ad on the first phase, is a terrible implementation. I feel like they could have tuned the ads down a little bit and then just forced you to deal with a spawn. That would have been more interesting. But, you know. Dathia. Dathia's okay. I didn't love it. I certainly didn't hate it. I think we'll just put her in B, honestly, because that's my gut reaction. Like, the fight was fine. The mythic mechanic, dropping off the circles into the ads to spawn an ad was pretty precise, and you had to like have someone duplicate marks early to get an ad out early enough so that you could get blown over to the ad platform. The ad platform was like fairly engaging. There's some good AoE there. But by the end of the season, or like midway through the season, people were doing like a skip strategy where they basically sent like one or maybe two people over just to kick the big ad, and then they zerged the boss down. And I guess that was fine. I enjoy like getting gear, making bosses easier, so I'm good with that. But Cyclone was kind of annoying. The tornadoes were mostly fine. You could generally see the path that they were going because there were arrows. But yeah, I don't have a whole lot to say about Dathia. It is what it is. I didn't enjoy coming back to it, so that's why I can't really rank it higher, but it was fine. Broodkeeper. I almost want to duplicate Broodkeeper Square because I feel like there are two very different roles. One for the boss group and two for the ad group. And for instance, when I killed it on my Elemental Shaman, I was in the ad group, and I didn't mind Broodkeeper. I thought it was pretty fun. You got to blast a fuck ton of ads. There was some kicking, some stunning, but for the most part, you were just mass AoEing with a little bit of single target in between waves, which I found fun. And then I got to heal it on the boss, which I found healing it on the boss was fun because there's a lot of burst healing. Whenever you break an egg, there's just a large burst of damage, so I found that fun as a Holy Paladin to heal. But wiping because the tank didn't have it in the precise spot to get 3 eggs at once sucked. DPS fumbling with their extra action buttons because for whatever reason they're too dumb to bind them properly. If you had poor healers who were on the boss who couldn't heal the squishy classes, then it was not fun. I also don't like the health pool being gated by eggs. Like, oh, if you have 16 eggs alive, she can't go under, 32% or whatever it is. Like, that's trash. You should be able to brute force the fight to some degree. Having to clear every egg is dumb. I don't think she was awful, but I don't think she was great. We got to put her in C. Razageth. First boss, or first end boss of the tier. What do I think about her? I think the fight is mostly good. I do think the intermissions kind of sucked. Now, I didn't get to do Mythic Res in Season 1, but I did do it for Awakened. And as a healer, there is a lot to heal. There is also a lot of coordination required with CCs, getting like good Ring of Frosts, Ring of Peace, Blinding Lights, like your big AoE disorients or knocks. Those are really important for Sparks. Your positioning was also pretty important. Overall, I think it was a pretty fun fight, but I can't say it's definitely not the best end boss of the expansion. It was good, but and I know there were some tuning issues early on, like World First Guilds had a hell of a time on this boss. They had to nuke the shield in the intermission phases multiple times because it was like way overtuned. Even if your whole raid went to one side, people weren't breaking it. Those were the absolute best players, so not a great indicator of a well balanced fight. Overall, I think it was pretty fun. I think I'm gonna have to put it in A. But the things keeping it from S is definitely like tuning. It took multiple tuning passes to get it in the right spot. Some classes could not stay on the platform well. Like if you didn't have a life grip or an evoker to save you, like I played a paladin. If I had played it in season 1, I would not have been able to stay on the platform. Pretty awful design. Going back to like Senarth, no one likes being pulled or displaced when they can't control it. So, meh. It was okay. I thought it was a pretty good first tier overall, but Terror's taking the top spot for me. Now, moving on to Aberrus. This tier I played Shadow Priest mostly, but I've healed it all on Awaken, so most of it is from a healing perspective. Kazara's pretty good. Going back to the trend of first bosses being good. I gotta put it high A, not above Kurog, but high A. Not too much to it, just a little bit of coordination, putting the portals, dropping them in the right spots, not kiting the lasers over existing like lava patches. The tanks there's not much to talk about, healers not much to talk about, but the idea and coordination of portals I think was interesting enough, and it's a good enough first boss. Completely single target, so push your buttons, kite appropriately, you win. Not too challenging. Amalgamation Chamber. We'll put this at the top of B. I don't have a whole lot to say about it. The mythic mechanic was interesting enough where you had to clear with someone of the opposite color in both phases. But again, by the end, people were just zerging the fire ad and no one was on the shadow ad, except for a tank. I didn't like that you couldn't stack them. Like, I guess you could in theory, but they got a gigantic damage buff, and it basically made the fight impossible. You get one shot by every mechanic. So I like when gear trivializes fights because the point of the RPGs, your character gets stronger and you see the progression. By the end of the tier, you're like, I want to blast the shit out of this boss, but that kind of forced you to keep them spread, which I wasn't a huge fan of. The mythic mechanic, not much to talk about other than clear with the opposite color. Positioning was kind of important for some things, but nothing was super lethal here unless you had the boss alive for 5+ minutes, which if you did, your DPS sucked. So, Forgotten Experiments. Now, initially progging this fight, I didn't like it, but I think after having healed it now, as well as DPS'd it, I think my opinion's gone up a little bit. I think we're gonna give it an A, again below Kurog. Now, the mechanics here is basically heroic. The bleed was permanent, so if you had evokers or bops or ice blocks, you could remove them. But coordination mattered a lot here. Positioning, your tanks had to really communicate. We kind of struggled with our tanks communicating when we did it in Aberrus, which made the fight a lot harder. Dropping off the dispels in a good spot, getting the masses. This is before they nerfed mass dispel, so it's a little bit harder now when Mass Dispel was a 2-minute CD, but overall pretty fun fight. I like that both bosses were active because it gave you a little bit of cleave at 50%. So it was interesting enough. And then bouncing the orbs, obviously the damage ramped up after you had soaked 1 or 2 orbs, and if you were a DPS, you really couldn't afford to soak more than that unless you had big CDs. So you had to kind of help juggle. Everyone needed to help. Overall, pretty good fight. Assault of the Zakali. This is one of those ad fights that I'm not a huge fan of. I kind of want to put it in D. It's not worse than Senarth, but it's not good either. Yeah, I think we're going to put it in D. And only because I think the point of the fight was that you're supposed to be managing ads in between having the boss on your platform, which really didn't happen. Because if you were any half decent guild, you just DPS through it. You just blew everything in the first 30 seconds and tried to burn it before shield. One second, my camera is out of focus slightly. Love it. Love the low lighting environments. Cool. Thanks for bearing with me. So I just didn't like the fact that people were entirely skipping the whole ad management. I think that would be more interesting between ad management and boss. I mean, the mythic mechanic, there wasn't a whole lot to speak of. You got blown off the platform if you were in a bad spot. You used rocks. I don't know. The rocks were kind of a stupid gimmick I didn't really like. They were effective, but it just wasn't fun to do. So I'm not going to rate this one very highly. Rashok. Ooh, Rashok's got to be an S. I got to put at the top of S. Again, similarities here. High healing check, lots to heal, single target, a little bit of a dance involved. Planning cooldowns for it was very interesting because by the end of the fight, when you're really pushing that enrage timer, 6 minutes or whatever it was, you're just trying to eke out everything you possibly can, and those slams are crushing your raid. And so that I thought was fun for me as a healer. As a DPS, it wasn't as fun, but as a healer, I really enjoyed Rashok, and I think the community as a whole really praised this boss. I wish Blizzard would do more of this, personally. Ziskarn. I'm going to give this one a B. This one is not going to rank highly for me just because it went through several iterations. Basically, there was a bug that early guilds found that you could pull it into a certain spot where none of the mechanics worked, and you could just stack on the wall and nothing else mattered. You just had your lasers move off to the side. No big deal. Avoided dragon heads entirely. Dumb. And then Blizzard randomly hotfixed it like a month in, and then people had to relearn how to kill it properly. I don't think the golems were a super engaging mechanic. I didn't really enjoy the baiting of the dragon heads. Like, yeah, there was, some movement involved, and if you were a slow moving class, it kind of sucked. I didn't like that there was no clear visual indicator of the tactical destruction, the dragon head. It could look like you were not in it, and, there'd be a slight puff of smoke or flame, and you would die. And that is not fun. Well-defined mechanics need to be present. Magmarax. I think Magmarax is probably like mid to high A for me. Again, if you notice the theme, it's a pretty simple mechanical boss, high healing check, a decently high DPS check, depending on your gear level at the time. People came up with a strat where you soak the first like 3 sets of pools, and then after that, people started sacrificing themselves or jumping it off to the side to be next to the lava, and I was fine with that. And then you needed to have coordinated swirly soaks. You could only soak one unless you had an immunity. The knockback was kind of annoying. Again, no one really likes being displaced. I was frequently rescued or life gripped. But overall, it's a pretty good single target heal/DPS check boss. Echo. Oh, Echo. Is this... This honestly might be the worst fight of the expansion for me. I gotta put the bottom of D. And it pretty much only because of private auras. Having to finagle your entire raid's weak auras to match and have a list so that you could manually count down to whatever spot you were for the heart debuff was not fun. I really didn't like it. There were some overlaps where you had basically one character's worth of pixels where your whole raid had to stand, and if everyone didn't go to the right spot, or if their weak aura wasn't working, or they didn't have their map add-on loaded, then you were dead. And that made the fight extremely frustrating. I already didn't like the ad mechanic, where the MCs kill the ads to break the shield, and then the whole raid can kill the ad. I didn't find that fun in heroic, and having it in mythic with the hearts was pretty annoying. Having designated wall breaks was pretty annoying. The last phase was fine, I guess. I didn't mind the last phase, where you stood in a portal and only one person could stand in it, and it would disappear. It was the better part of the fight, but it's still not great. But the nature of private auras really destroyed this fight for me, and I just was not a fan. Sarkareth. Ooh, I liked Sarkareth a lot. I think I have to give it an S. Sarkareth might be my favorite fight for the expansion. Really well designed end boss. Not 10 fucking minutes long, which Blizzard could learn a lot from. I think people really enjoy the shorter end bosses that are faster paced. Things like Blackhand. Sark was another one. First phase was very coordination heavy, very healing heavy. You had to point the breath in the right spot so people could clear. You had to be dodging fire bombs the whole time. You had to get your disintegrate lines out well enough that people could clear off of them, and if you didn't, you died. And that first 2 minutes, very fast paced, very fun. And then you had a little bit of ad cleave in the second phase. If you were on bomb duty, then you got to come up with a big DPS buff. So it wasn't like you were just getting sent downstairs to do nothing. You actually got rewarded for doing the mechanic with a large haste buff, which for some classes was probably really sick. I never did it, but I assume they had fun with that buff. Last phase, again, extremely coordination heavy, getting barrages out, soaking the right black holes, getting the dispels in the right spot, destroying meteors. Great boss. I wish the lore had been there from a nerd perspective. There wasn't as much lore for Sarkareth. I guess there was some for Drakthir focused players, but in general, he wasn't an incarnate, so I didn't care as much. But overall, great boss. Blizzard, please take notes from this one. This one was an excellent end boss. People love 6-minute fights rather than 12 to 15. I promise. Okay, so moving on to Mirdrasil, which we did this one as a Holy Paladin. Gnarlroot. Again, just really good first bosses, honestly. I can't really complain. When you don't hate a first boss, that's a good sign for the raid. Gnarlroot. There's just not a whole lot to say. It was pretty much heroic. You had to drop the lava puddles onto the trees to spawn the trees and kill the trees before the second phase, or they all uprooted. So there was a slight bit of coordination there. You needed to be positioned properly so that you could quickly get through the intermission phase. And then once you were done with the intermission phase, you got a big damage buff. So there's a theme with some of these first bosses where people ad burst phases or increased damage, vulnerabilities. That stuff is fun. People love that. Agira. Ugh. Not an Agira fan. Below Broodkeeper? Honestly, kind of. I just didn't like it. I didn't like the spears in particular. I hated having to have a weak aura fucking tell me where to go. I would much rather YOLO the mechanic, but the problem is you can't trust people to do it. And yeah, it's not a private aura, so weak auras did solve it. But when I first played this boss, I was in a guild with less mechanically minded players, and this boss was pretty fucking annoying because the spears would dunk on people, and if you didn't pop a CD and there was 2 or more stacked, you were dead. The soak phases and the intermission were mostly fine. Range pretty much had to deal with it and do it themselves, while melee just fucked off and hit the boss. The healing debuffs was kind of annoying because you didn't really get any indication it was going to be you. If that first set went out and it picks half the raid, and you're the half that's in, and you happen to get a fat heal, maybe the Holy Paladin pressed Divine Toll for some reason as the healing debuff goes out, and it instantly pops while you're in melee, and the orbs just kill people, that part's not fun. I wish there had been a 2 or 3 second delay where it's you have this mark coming, and then you'd have time to run away and give yourself time to get into a good position. Not great. Didn't like it. Not engaging. Volcaros, yeah, Volcaros was fine. Simple, single target, reasonable healing check. The tank debuff, you had to taunt as the jaws were coming out, and then the tanks had to like sustain a little bit afterwards with the large dot on them. I enjoyed the soak mechanic. If you got into the soak too early or they moved on top of you, they killed you because it did so much damage. But then after the debuff ticked, you'd have about 3 seconds to soak onto them. You split into two sides, melee plus ranged on each side. It was fine. It's a fine single target boss. Nothing really to talk about, nothing really to complain about. I think B is a good spot for it. Laridar. I did like Laridar a lot, but I don't think I can give it an S. I think we'll put it at the top of A. Can I put it here? Yeah, we'll put it at the top of A. And as a healer, I really liked it because, well, it was very healing intensive. And the only reason I can't put it in S as a healer is the healing frames sucked. Now, this is going to conflict with some ranking later on, potentially, but Laridar I thought was a very simple fight, mostly. The hose, you had 3 people who had to coordinate, not drop their chain. You could really only soak 1 orb at a time. If the boss got it, he did exponentially more damage, so obviously you wanted, as a DPS, wanted to soak that. But the healing was pretty tough at some times. You worked with area denial by the end. Overall, pretty good fight. My only complaint is that the health bars. I did not like the health bars of the summon, the treants, and the roots. I mean, depending on what add-on you used, I had Elve, so it would take a few seconds and they would pop up on the right-hand side of my screen. And then there was like a very big delay, and if they needed healed or not. So I honestly just used nameplates a lot of the time and just moused over them rather than use the frames. Blizzard needs to find a way to better get friendly ads that aren't a part of your group incorporated into the frames, just to make them, I think, look cleaner, more fleshed out. Council of Dreams. I didn't like this fight either. I think it's actually worse than Agira. Just not fun. Tank positioning mattered a great deal with the swipes. You couldn't take 2. Realistically, under very few circumstances could you live if you took 2. Ducking was annoying. Having to sacrifice DPS to go duck, or like, hey, can we have an extra healer? And your job is just to be a fucking duck the whole fight to go clear patches. Awful. When your ducks accidentally clear the 1 patch you need to remove Pip's debuff, and then you wiped. Awful. Tanks not getting the charge through the proper, through the Dryad to stop the vines. Awful. There was a lot to heal. Not a great multi-target fight because everything is so spread out. So if you weren't like an Ellie Shaman or a Shadow Priest or a Boomkin, you probably hated this fight. Or maybe Destro Warlock, I guess. But outside of those, you probably hated the fight because realistically you could only get 2 targets, and even then it was sometimes finicky because the Dryad and Pip both bounced around like crazy. Nimue. Nimue is like another mid-boss for me. I'll put it in between Amalgamation and Ziskarn. The mechanic for Mythic, you had to go to the back. You could only go to the back once, or you got a big debuff, and if you returned to the zone at the in the back with the debuff, you would most likely die. It did crazy damage. So you had to split into 3 even-sized groups because you were most likely doing 3 phases depending on your DPS. That was fine. I stood out in range most of the time, so the beams weren't a problem for me. I just soaked green plants and helped out a lot. If you were good at positioning, you could really optimize DPS and soaking. The melee, I kind of didn't like the melee flower, where you had to soak the red one within 10 seconds or it would explode. Could be annoying depending on the beams, or if someone soaked a green one on top of the red one and the green one started to explode, people would move out of red and then red would blow up and then your raid would die. So that part wasn't amazing. It was okay. It was fine. Smolderon. Smolderon was pretty good. This is definitely where the difficulty ramped up a lot. I'm going to give it an A. DPS check was pretty tight here the first time. Healing check was extremely tight. There was a ton to heal. You had healing debuffs. You had big raid smashes. The tanks had to run away for fall off damage. You had lots of lava waves to dodge, which the lava waves were sometimes very cluttered. But if you had really good positioning, you were rewarded by the end with tons of space to work with, which was nice. If your positioning sucked, then half the floor is covered with lava. It made moving difficult. You got a damage buff in the intermission as long as you soaked the tank smash appropriately, so that was nice. Overall, pretty good. It was definitely a big step up from the previous bosses, going from like Nimue, Laridar to Smolderon. Those are like 20 to 30 white bosses to 100, 150 white bosses. So these next three really spiked in difficulty. Tindril. I did not like Tindril, man. I gotta put it in fucking D. Just not fun. The boss feels like it's bloodlusted. It's doing mechanics every 10 seconds. I don't think I've ever felt more stressed as a player. Like, I felt like I was completely stretched too thin, that I was at my capacity. When I was progging it for the first time as a holy paladin, and I was given, all these odd jobs because, you have to dispel, and you have to freedom, and then you have to sack this person. And I felt like I was using every single button in my kit, and almost every global was full. And it felt like I just didn't have a breather at any point in this fight. Not fun. And just like way too many binary mechanics. Oh, you fuck up a dispel, you dispelled half a second early, your raid is dead, go again. Excuse me. Oh, one of your melee didn't, get the feather for whatever reason and missed his flare bomb, dead, go again. The amount of melee that died to fire beam is not fun. They had to change the fight because of performance issues early because he did so much shit that he lagged out people. Between fire beam and the roots and was it Falling Star? It was just a ridiculous amount of stuff going on. It's like way too much. Not a fun boss. Too many binary mechanics. The dragon flying was fine. I didn't mind the dragon riding. That was fairly easy. And if you had split people appropriately, you got all the buffs so that you could break the shield. The shield wasn't too tight, but you did need to push a little bit of damage. Healing was relatively bursty. There'd be nothing going on for 5 to 10 seconds, and then you would get hit, for 2/3 of your health pool or more over the next 5 to 8 seconds. So you had to buoy the raid back up, which was fine. I just didn't like the nature of the binary mechanics. While I do understand its mythic rating, when one person makes a mistake, which is very easy to do over 3 or 4 hours, if one person makes a mistake, then you wipe. And when there's 20 people in the raid, that's 20 mistakes. If every player makes at least one mistake, you're wiping at least 20 times, and it's just not fun. It's not good for morale. Honestly, I enjoy the kinds of fights where if a DPS dies, it's very punishing, but you aren't dead. You can still come back with perfect play. If you're coordinated enough and people push their buttons correctly, I feel like you should be able to come back from a DPS dying. Oh, I ate a fire beam. Okay, cool. Oh, I missed the flare bomb. No, your raid's dead. Go fuck yourself. Start over. Not a huge fan. Farok. Okay, so I gave Laridar an A instead of an S because of the health bars. But the health bars were not really a factor for me in Farok. And as an end boss, scale and the lore, because he'd been built up a little over the expansion, he wasn't just a one-off villain. Sarkarath kind of came out of nowhere. But the Incarnates were built up a little bit more. As a healing fight, extremely challenging. A ridiculous amount of coordination. I gotta give this an S. It was tough. It was definitely tough to progress it. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of wipes. I think Tindril took us about 200. Farok, I probably spent, I don't know, probably about 300 wipes before I got into a kill. And it was tough. The only downside for me is, yes, there were some binary mechanics. Actually, I don't even know if that's entirely true. I'd say the negative to Farok is the reliance of weak auras. having to pre-position people for the intermission phase. Without the intermission phase, I think this fight is the best fight this expansion. But with the intermission, I'll put it lower than Sarkareth. But overall, very fun. The Dispel on CD mechanic also was not great in Phase 1. I did not like that as a healer. I can't imagine any healer likes it. There's a difference between saying, do this mechanic and you're rewarded, or no, you have to press it on CD or it's unhealable. Now, that might be a little hyperbolic, but just not a fun mechanic, pressing Dispel. Dispel is a mana sink, and your numbers aren't going anywhere. You don't feel like you're accomplishing anything, but you have to do it. It's just not great. But overall, I enjoyed learning the dance. Melee getting hit by frontals was par for the course, but if you had good ranged, you could alleviate that a little bit with good positioning, so you were rewarded for playing properly. It might also lose some points for the reliance on a Death Knight tank. Early on, you really needed a Death Knight for Mass Grip in those second and third intermission phases with the little ads and the Colossi, just to make it easier. But once you had that figured out and you had Nox coordinated, reasonably fun fight. DPS needed to keep head on a swivel, not blazing the ads. Healers had to heal the ads. There was some weird gimmicky stuff with rescue and is it void swap? The priest talent that swaps your health with, and you could do a friendly. People were doing that with the trees. If you had a Mistweaver monk, they could top the trees like instantly. So you were definitely rewarded for playing well in this fight. The last phase was crazy hectic, but exhilarating, and when you finally got it down, it felt so good. So even barring the weird health bars and dispel mechanic, I still gotta say S for me. Overall, as you can see, I have a pretty favorable opinion of most of these bosses. Some of these are duds, and Blizzard could really learn from them. Private Aura issue, lots of binary mechanic, pass-fail. Forced displacement, not fun. Forced not being able to kill the boss is just like, oh, here's your health gate. It stops at 30% until you kill X number of eggs. Like, come on, man. But overall, pretty good expansion. As a raider, I really enjoyed it. This is like the first expansion in a while where I've played from start to finish, and I've loved pretty much every second of it. Super excited to continue raiding in the War Within. My guild's going to be going for Hall of Fame. We're going to be doing splits, so Holy Paladin's my main character, and Preservation Evoker is going to be my alt. And then I'm also probably going to keep Shaman and or Mistweaver for a third character. We'll kind of see how that plays out, but yep, on Thursday we'll be streaming it. Thursday night when I get off of work, we'll be streaming the leveling process. We also took off Friday, so we'll be leveling all weekend. Almost certainly going to do all 5 healers if there's nothing better to do, so feel free to come check us out on Twitch then. And yeah, hope you guys had a great expansion, and we'll see you for the War Within. Peace.